discuss about the happenings in the Madison Heights. Welcome to the show, Brian, Mayor Brian.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and to speak to you and with all your viewers and listeners. Thank you for inviting me to this.
You're welcome. Welcome to the Script TV. Okay, just we want to know in general about the about your background and also the Madison Heights. I mean, a little bit about your law profession and then the life in Madison Heights. That will be helpful to understand about you with our viewers.
Yeah, thank you for asking me. I have been a local politician for the last 13 years. I was a city councilman for 8 years, a mayor for 5 years, and just starting this week, I became the judge. Um, and all during that time, I was also a licensed attorney. I went to law school in Detroit, Michigan, and I handled all types of trial cases, criminal cases, landlord cases, and some big civil cases. And so when I became judge, that was kind of a combination of all of my passions and experience. On one hand, an elected official in government, and on the other hand, a lawyer. And that's really what a judge is, both a lawyer and a politician.
That's very interesting. I mean, a very good, interesting profile. I mean, a lawyer and a politician, and going to be a judge in few days. So, very congratulations on your appointment as a judge, and we'll talk about it later part of the discussion. So,
Thank you.
we would like to know a little bit about the Madisonites, some in general, the demographics, and also the business environment in the Madisonites. That will be helpful, please.
Right. So you know how Madison Heights, it's a suburb of north of Detroit, Michigan. And as you know, a lot of American cities, they developed by sprawling away from the urban center. So instead of building more housing in the city, Detroit spread geographically. And so Madison Heights, my hometown, is one of those cities. We're 2 miles north of the border of Detroit. And it's just a short drive to downtown Detroit to get to the world headquarters of General Motors, the Ford Motor Company world headquarters is in another suburb, and Chrysler Automotive is just a couple miles north of us. So this area is really dominated by the auto industry. So my father was an engineer with General Motors for 40 years. All my friends and family have some connection to the auto industry, whether they're in sales at a dealership or they're in design and engineering, or maybe they work at a mechanic. We are the motor city, and we just live and breathe cars. And it really has dictated development. So our region doesn't have mass transportation. We don't have a subway system because we want everyone to buy a car, right?
That's true.
And so Madison Heights is one of those suburbs outside of Detroit City, and it's a working class city. So a lot of the residents are factory workers. They're the men and women that build the Ford trucks and cars and General Motors vehicles. And so it's a hardworking, honest city, and it's a fun city. No one's getting rich as a factory worker, but we have this great cultural spirit. We have a lot of community events, and the families stay in this area. So it's just a great place to live and raise a family.
Good to hear about the Madisonites. And recently, I think when a few months back, Madisonites has been in the news, and also looks like got some attention in the national level too, about the leak on the chemical leak on the 696 from a factory called Electroplating Services. So can you help us out in understanding a little more about what exactly happened there, and what's happening right now, and what remedies as a government, government took on that particular issue, please?
Yes, of course. That has been such an important issue. So even though, all across the world we've been dealing with stopping the spread of the coronavirus, as a government, we still have to protect from other dangers. And one of those dangers was this major chemical leak onto onto the freeway. And it was at the end of December 2019. All of the chemicals that this company were dumping into the ground, they got into the groundwater and froze, and that frozen chemical water burst into the freeway. And so for the first time, we saw what was underground. And so it was a chemical chrome plating facility. So in a lot of vehicles, you have the shiny chrome parts. Well, that's a highly toxic procedure to get that beautiful shiny auto part. And so this was a small factory, and it was a company that was owned by this one family for generations. And the current owner just had a difficult time maintaining his business. So he cut corners. And when he did that, so instead of paying to properly dispose of chrome waste, he would dump those chemicals into the dirt floor of his basement. And so this was years of dumping chemicals into the ground. And so eventually, all of that contaminated soil and sand and clay built up to the point that it literally just bubbled over when it started freezing. And so the state government immediately came in, because the city is too small to handle something this big. And it's been 6 months since we first noticed this. The state has been pumping contaminated water from this ground every day for the last 6 months.
Wow.
And the groundwater continues to come up with toxins in it. And so the fear was that as these toxins are now spurting into the street, that we're afraid that they're going to get into the sewer system, and the sewer is connected to the river, to the lake. And so those chemicals will go from the ground into the river and then back into our drinking water. And so we have to do all we can to suck that. Well, first of all, to stop the spread of those chemicals. And then now we got to go into the ground and start digging up the dirt that was left behind, because you can't. We don't want anyone touching that dirt anymore. So there's layer upon layer of problems, and the next steps are going to be expensive and time consuming.
Oh, okay. So is it completely done, or it's kind of, are we still in the process of fixing the problem right now?
Yeah, we're still in the emergency phase of just sucking up the contaminated water. Once the water, it's just groundwater, the water that is just naturally in the ground.
Okay.
It's not like it's a running river. Once we finish sucking contaminated groundwater, that's when we'll go to the next phase of doing a full environmental remediation of the site. And effectively, we're going to dig as deep as we can and remove every grain of contaminated soil. And then you got to properly dispose of it. Let me go back a step. So first we have to continue to remove all the contaminated water. But then before we can remove the soil, we have to demolish the buildings. So the owner was challenging us on the demolition. And so the city government had to go to court and get a court order to allow the city to demolish the building so we could go clean up the dirt. And we had to demonstrate to the court that the building was dangerous in itself. And the building was in complete disrepair. It was a death trap. Windows were blown out. So many tipped over barrels of chemical had compromised the structural steel of the building. And actually, our fire department said if this building ever lit fire, we would not be able to put out the fire. We don't have the tools, and we'd have to evacuate 500,000 people downwind from a chemical fire. So the next step is the building has to go, and then once the building is gone, then we can clean up the soil. But we're a small city, and we're worried about the millions of U.S. dollars this would cost. It would bankrupt a small city. So we need the state government or the federal government to find the money to clean this up the right way.
Okay. So are you getting enough support from the state and federal to clean up this particular mess, whatever you have in the Madison Heights right now?
Yeah, but it really comes down to relationships. So one of the most important parts of me being in public office is cooperating with the governor's office, county leadership, federal leadership. And because of those friendships, I they had an open door policy to me, and they listened to what the city needs. And so the state has been our most active partner. The state of Michigan has spent a lot of money on the cleanup, and before coronavirus, the state promised to pay for the full cleanup and demolition. Coronavirus policy has kind of changed the spending priority of the state. But if and when we get past coronavirus, maybe there'll be a second wave, we don't know. We trust that the state will back us up. So the timeline is uncertain, but we have state partnership. The federal government is a little too slow, and the federal government was honest with us, saying that they have 10,000 other sites to get to before they get to ours, right? There's a lot of industrial pollution in America, and we just have to get in line.
Gotcha. Hopefully, I mean, this thing will taken care under the leadership of the city, Madison Heights, and the state leadership, and hopefully it will be clean and then safe for everybody. Let's hope for that. And coming back to the Madison Heights, I mean, I live in Troy. I mean, in Troy we have east and west Troy. I mean, not very big difference. I mean, but there we call it the east side of the properties and the west side of the properties when you talk about real estate. But something similar to that. I mean, in Madison Heights, I've been hearing about. I mean, south and north in Madison Heights. So, what is that divide of south and north in Madison Heights? Can you help us out in understanding? I've been in Troy area for more than, I would say, 12 years and 20 years in Michigan. I've never, only after researching about you, then I heard about South and North and Madison Heights. I've not heard of the South and North differentiation in Madison Heights before. So help us out in understanding what is the difference and what's happening there, please.
The city is so small that it's kind of funny to think that there's different sides. I think a lot of it is just there's two public high schools, so there's some rivalry. The two high schools want to compete against each other, so that kind of the energy of two high schools competing against each other bleeds into other conversations. But actually, it's really a historical conversation for our whole region. Okay. And so as the Detroit area was developing, you really look mile by mile outside of the center of Detroit. And so a city like Madison Heights was founded in, the 1950s. And so, think about going back to 1950s, the city of Troy, where you live, that was probably mostly farmland. Okay. In 1950s, Madison Heights was similar. There were pig farms and horse ranches. And so when people were starting to develop the suburbs in the 1950s, those homes were built around like 10 Mile. And then like a decade later in the 60s, they just went 1 mile north to like 12 Mile. And then, in the 70s, they went up to 13 Mile. And, they just kept going through the region. And so think about the people who built houses in the 1950s. If they were 20 years old in the 50s, how old would they be now, right? They could be, right? And so those founding fathers and mothers of Madison Heights in the 1950s it's a lot of widows and widowers. It's a lot of 90-year-old women who are only surviving on a Social Security check, maybe $1,000 a month. And so those people, a lot of those 90 are elders. They're still living alone, and they're living in extreme poverty. And so that really impacts neighborhood by neighborhood on a mile per every mile going north in the city, where you get to the north part of Madison Heights, 14 Mile, the border with Troy. Those are the biggest homes in the city because, you know, by the 1970s and 80s, just the building culture in America were bigger houses, bigger backyards, right? And then you get into Troy, right? And houses built in the 90s and the 2000s, they just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And so really, it's a history lesson. And, you know, my new job as judge is in Hazel Park. Hazel Park is a little bit older than Madison Heights. So those houses are smaller. And so, you know, and so as our elders are dying or moving, who's buying those new houses, right? So, you know, if you're a new doctor, you just got your license as a physician, and you want to live in Southeast Oakland County, and you have a young family, do you want to start your family in one of those small 800 square foot houses in Hazel Park, or do you want to pick the 4,000 square foot mansion in Troy, right? You know, some of those things, the idea of space and where you want to raise your family have changed over the last 60 years. And so what happens is a lot of professionals will move further away from Detroit just because they can afford bigger houses, where in Madison Heights, Hazel Park, Ferndale, you get more of the working class families, maybe the nurses and the teachers versus the doctors and the lawyers.
Gotcha. So I see the difference, I mean, in the way the people have been living there, and then it's been like over a period of time. I mean, that it is the same thing any other place, even Detroit downtown also, you see the old houses and the new houses or new buildings, those kind of things. That's the kind of thing. Hopefully. So how is it impacting the governance on the Madison Heights? I mean, I see some decisions would be challenging in those. So if it is just like a country level, I mean, you see the similar issues at the country level or the state level, those kind of things. Like, I mean, you need to support the people who need some help, and people who are contributing to the system. So it's always a balance between these two. I mean, you need some people need help, and some people can contribute, and they can come back and complain that my money is going in the wrong way. So I'm sure you might have, I mean, at your level, at Madison Heights level, I'm sure you might have got these kind of situations. And how do you guys resolve those conflicts?
It's a challenge, and we have to know our role as a government. You know, in America, you know, like, government doesn't do everything that it does in other countries. My wife was born in Taiwan. She's Taiwanese. And, you know, the government does a lot of things differently and better in some respects, right? Maybe a better education system, better healthcare system.
No doubt about it. Yes.
You know, there's more of a social security net in Taiwan than there is in America. So America relies on a lot of charities and faith-based groups. And, you know, during coronavirus, when people in Madison Heights started losing their job, there was a great demand for food. People panicked. Like, I was just laid off. I don't know when I'm going to get unemployment checks. And so Madison Heights is not the government or the entity that is going to feed the people. But what we did is we provided our city buildings that weren't using because we shut down. We provided free rent to private charities to house their food packaging and food delivery systems. So, you know, local government in Michigan is strictly created for public safety. We are here to protect the safety and the well-being of our residents. So police and fire are primary, and then everything else has to be somehow connected to protecting your health. And so we stretch that argument sometimes, like, well, why do we have a library? Well, we say, well, education of a library is important to protect your health because you need access to materials. And so it's difficult. So we know, because we study census tracts, we study poverty reports, and so we know people are struggling. And so we can alleviate, like, financial burdens of people living in poverty by waiving a portion of their tax bill, or by allowing them to make tax payments or water bill payments over a course of time. You know, one of the things we do is anyone anyone that's a senior can automatically get a tax reduction because
Mm.
we tend to realize that they're going to be lower income in our community, especially those I mentioned earlier, living on $1,000
Yes.
a month Social Security check. And so there's some things where we alleviate the financial burden. Of course, they have to demonstrate a true hardship, but we're prepared and we're aware of people living in poverty. But I mean, we equally apply our services no matter if they're rich or poor or educated or uneducated.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I've been hearing about the in the news that I mean some cities are providing the. I mean, they're not shutting off their water. I mean, even though they don't pay the bills, those kind of things I've been hearing. That's a challenge with for the city. They need to provide the services, and at the same time, they need to manage their own budgets. I mean, that's where I mean we have a. Most of the cities are struggling to get some funding from the uh, federal. That's a different topic, probably. I don't know if you want to touch that or you want to. How is the funding for financial situation of the Madison Heights? I mean, compared to the other. mm, in general, about the Madison Heights financial situation. I mean, taxes and the
The
revenue.
financial system for cities is completely broken. And
Mm.
that was proven during the Great Recession a decade ago. So governments, local governments, cities, townships, villages, get most of their funding through property taxes. And so when property taxes were cut in half 10 years ago, that meant we immediately had to cut half of our budget, right? We have
Yeah.
limited savings. And so we've had to rely on like other sources of revenue. And we've tried to press the state government to share more of their budget with cities. And that has slightly improved year to year. But with federal government, you could ask every mayor or township supervisor in Michigan. We all support the HEROES Act and the CARES Act that would
Yeah.
bring more money to local government. But it's a challenge. I mean, so when people started getting laid off a couple months ago for coronavirus reasons, we had to, we were compassionate. We realized, okay, if people don't have work, they don't have income, maybe they can't do things like lawn maintenance. So maybe
Yeah.
we should not ticket someone $100 for not cutting their grass every week. So the city lost a source of revenue through fines and tickets, but it was the obvious, compassionate, smart thing to do for our people. Eventually we're going to have to start maintaining our neighborhoods, because we don't want rats coming in if it's knee-high grass, and so but that's going to be something the city has to kind of to balance now. Is okay, when do we go back to doing full-time code enforcement? This is very challenging. The money side of running government is a constant pressure and concern of ours, because we're not like a business that can just go bankrupt. I mean, we have to provide policing services no matter what. And so during the recession, we basically had to cut everything, that wasn't police and fire.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean, yeah. I mean, about you. I heard very one good point about you, like collaborating with the neighboring cities in getting help from your 911 and the police, and also you promised, or you kind of thinking of hiring more police people or 911 supporters. I mean, who can work in 911. So where are you on that? I mean, are you able to achieve those goals? I mean, with this funding, I mean, with right now the financial crisis, I mean, are you able to do that, or how? What do you think
Yes.
about those things?
So it's a difficult conversation. So last year, the voters of Madison Heights approved an increase to the millage to allow hiring more police officers and firefighters and a 911 operator, and to spend more money on development to bring in some new businesses to our city. Because of the crisis, we've realized we need to not fully raise those taxes. And so the city actually decided, you know what, we're only going to the voters gave us permission to raise the taxes, but we're only going to raise about 25% of what the voters would have allowed. So that 75% tax increase will go back to the property owners of Madison Heights. But with that 25% increase, we're only charging 25% of the planned increase. That'll go to hiring police officers and 911 operators, and we've already done that. Now, 911 operators, that's like 6 to 8 months of training, so it's very difficult training. So it's going to take some time to get them on board. But yeah, so public safety will be prioritized for hiring, and that has taken place.
Gotcha. Very nice. Thank you very much for the information. So how is the whole pandemic is affecting the Madisonite citizens and the government of the Madisonite? I mean, how is it and the whole environment in Madisonites during this pandemic time?
Yeah, so we have, of all people in Madisonites, there's about 30,000 residents, and just over 30 people have passed away from complications with coronavirus, and that that's impacted every neighborhood in the city. And so every meeting we start by announcing those statistics just to remind the citizens of how serious it is. And so even though the numbers are trending down, and you look at the weekly case numbers, they're trending down over the course of time. This is still a very, very deadly disease if it takes a hold. And so as a city, we're trying to project the seriousness of this. And so we support the government's efforts to encourage social distancing. We encourage people to wear masks when they're unable to social distance. And we promote just healthy standards of living. And my wife from Taiwan, her and I have talked about this. So in Taiwan, they're more accustomed to wearing masks in public. We're Americans, I'm just getting used to the concept. And so we just have to provide education and support and encouragement for just best practices of being clean, and also equip businesses with the tools and the knowledge so that when they open up, that businesses also project healthy practices too.
Okay, that's good to know about the practices. I mean, you mentioned about offline. You mentioned about you traveled to India with your wife. I mean, she's doing an MBA from a school which I know it's ISB, International School of Business. So can you talk a little bit about your trip to India and Hyderabad?
Hyderabad is one of the most beautiful places in the world, and my wife and I spent some time there earlier this year, February 2020. My wife was at ISB for part of her master's degree program. She was there for 8 weeks, and then I spent about a week and a half there. And right, what do they call it? The Silicon Valley of India, but it's of the world. I mean, you think about all the important businesses that have come from Hyderabad, and now international businesses are moving to Hyderabad because of the talent, because of the potential, and it's amazing. I mean, think about how fast Hyderabad has grown, right? I mean, and you see that growth, like
yes,
the amazing, beautiful buildings going up in the neighborhoods. But what I loved about Hyderabad was the history, and so my wife and I spent time in Charminar.
Yeah,
just how beautiful it is, like shopping there, and I stand out a little bit just because how I look with my light hair, and so but people would come up to us, oh, where are you from? Are you Australian? Are you American? And they'd buy us some tea or some cookies, and I can't wait to go back. We also considered that trip to Hyderabad our honeymoon, so we got to visit just some beautiful locations. And my wife made some friends for life with some other students at ISB. And actually, maybe State Representative Padma Kupa from Troy.
Yeah, yes, she's from Troy. I know her. Mm-hmm.
Some of her in-laws are from Hyderabad, and so we exchanged phone numbers. It's amazing, like how small the world is. But I think more Americans are going to learn about how important Hyderabad is. To technology, to information, and government, right? I mean, think about all the important embassies and consulates that are located. So, I mean, there's foreign policy that's going to change the world coming out of that region. Oh, we even went to the movie studio. What's the movie studio about an hour out?
Ramoji Rao.
Yeah, Ramoji. Yeah, so
Ramoji,
we did the
yes.
tour of
Ramoji Rao.
Ramoji and got to see, all those beautiful movie sets. Just made that area has it all: culture, art, entertainment, good people, business, industry, geography. It's a gem. You're lucky to come from there, and I'm lucky to spend a little bit of time there.
Good. Thank you very much for the good words about India and Hyderabad, especially. That's where I come from. And when you said about your wife being from the Taiwan, I mean, Taiwan is one of the countries, I mean, which is able to control the coronavirus, even though they have been very next to the China. That's one of the countries which is able to control, I mean, protect their citizens from spreading the coronavirus among them. That's very nice. Coming back to another point, I mean, in the news today, nowadays we see more protests. I mean, any city, I mean, let it be Troy or Madison Heights or Detroit or New York or Washington D.C. The Black Lives Matter, and so what is anything of that kind in Madison Heights? And so, what do you say about those kind of movements right now, which are going on in the U.S.?
It broke my heart to see George Floyd murdered by that police officer in Minneapolis. And it's frightening that this happens so often. But there's really major differences between a large police department like Minneapolis or other major cities versus a small police department like Troy or Madison Heights or any of the other suburbs. And the difference is, first of all, control of the officers. So in Madison Heights, there's only 60 police officers. I personally know them all. When we hire 60 police officers, we have the ability to put them through really deep psychological exams. So we truly know the character and the propensity of violence or racism before we hire them. And we're not going to hire them. But if it comes to find out that an officer exhibits violent tendencies, maybe he hurt someone during an arrest, or someone complained that he or she was really offensive with his language during an arrest, we put that police officer through psychological exams and counseling. So if there is something wrong with the psyche of that officer, we can work it out now and get them off the streets and get them the emotional health care they need. And if there's ever an incident of racism, they're immediately terminated without pay. They're gone. They're out of our system. And a small police department like Madison Heights can afford to do that. It's totally different in a city like Detroit. So Madison Heights has 60 police officers. How many police officers does Detroit have? Like 5,000, maybe more. And so the hiring practices of a big city are much different. The city of Detroit will hire 60 police officers in one day. That's our entire department. So it's just because of the volume of a big city, they don't have the same hiring techniques that Madison Heights does. But it doesn't mean that I and our police officers and the people of Madison Heights don't care about the injustice that we can see across the country. And so Madison Heights has had 2 protests and demonstrations the last 2 weekends, but myself, our police chief, our residents have joined hands to make it productive, to say, look, we all think that violence is terrible. We all think that if there is a system that oppresses people of color, that we need to change that. And even if it's not in Madison Heights, we can still use our position of power and influence to say, look, our neighbors in other big cities, do what you can. Look at the best practices in our city, where we all officers are trained in de-escalation to avoid violence, where we have a zero tolerance policy for racist statements or actions. So even though Madison Heights is peaceful and safe, we must still join the argument and the position that it won't happen here, but it cannot happen in our neighbors. And that's sincerely held across all of City Hall, our police department, our employees. So there hasn't been looting or violence in our city. It's just been a very serious conversation of you need to change things. And we're going to be constantly working with our police to keep them honest and safe and trained, because we want to recruit the best people to get into law enforcement. We don't want to bully in our police department. We want someone who just wants to protect and serve and love our people, and that you can do that in a small city.
Very nice. One last point on that topic is like, I mean, when these protests are going on, the other side, I mean, there are two topics coming up in the back end, I mean, which is like, what about the white lives, and then the defunding of the police. So what do you say on those two topics?
Yeah, no one deserves to face violence. No one deserves to be mistreated physically or emotionally. And so, for a police officer, it's a very dangerous job. Even a simple traffic stop, they pull someone over for speeding, it's still in the back of the mind of the police officer that this could turn into a violent situation. The person in the car could have a weapon or, for some reason attack the police officer. So the stress levels of our police officer are really high. It's a hard job day to day. And over the course of the career, that can really physically break down the police officer, right? The stress manifests itself through different, things like heart disease or even mental illness. But my point is, no one deserves to be hurt. No one deserves violence. So of course, everyone's life is important. No one should be attacked or hurt. But the importance about using a phrase like Black Lives Matter, it's not to exclude anyone. What that does, it just recognizes that there is a history in this country of racism, and you still see that in some places of our country, where people, businesses or people in government discriminate people on the basis of race. And so when you say Black Lives Matters, it just recognizes that history of racism, and it's important for leaders to reach out to communities of color to say, I'm a white male that was raised in America. I will never understand the pain and trauma of racism. I'll never understand that pain, but I can do all I can to improve their situation, to be sure there's equality and fair treatment. And of course, equality and fair treatment applies to everyone. We're just trying to be sure those, especially people of color who have been mistreated, that they will get the same equal rights and equal treatment under my administration and the next administration. Because just because I'm a good guy doesn't mean the next mayor will be a good guy. So we need to start instituting policies that demonstrate equality and fairness.
Good. Thank you very much for the clarification. Expressing your views on this topic. So, and now you've been on the city council. You're practicing as a lawyer, then as a city council, and then a mayor, and this is your second term as a mayor. And now you're moving on to a new role, which is like, a judge of Hazel Park. One of the judges on the bench of the Hazel Park. So what is this move is going to be for you? And you've been a lawyer, and you've been servicing the community through the city, and also on a personal level. I heard, you've been providing some legal services at no cost to some of the people who needs the services. So from that move to the judge, so what is that feel like? What do you anticipate you're going to do in the next role?
Thank you for asking. Well, there are 3 judges in the 43rd District Court, and one of those judges retired a couple months ago. So when a judge retires, the governor of Michigan can make a decision to fill that empty seat to finish that judge's term. And so last week, Governor Gretchen Whitmer appointed me to fill that position as judge. And so I accepted her appointment, and I actually started yesterday. I raised my right hand and I took the oath of office to be the next judge. And so
Congratulations.
Thank you. So today was my first full day in court, and I handled a live criminal case in the court. And so I'm already the judge, practicing judge, but I only will be the judge for the remainder of the former judge's term. So that's actually to the end of this year. If I want to continue as the judge, I need to run for election to actually win the full 6-year term. And so if I want to continue to be the judge, the voters need to elect me in the August primary. And then if I'm the top 2 in the primary, the voters can elect me in November to be the full-time 6-year judge. And that's up to the voters. There's several people running. They're all really good people, good lawyers. I will have the opportunity to demonstrate to the public and the voters that I can handle the job, and all of those things that you mentioned about my career as mayor, where I gave free legal services to people. That'll demonstrate that I really care about this community. And then, I'll also be able to show that I'm a kind gentleman who will not be disrespectful to anyone that comes before the court. Whether you're a police officer or a defendant or a victim or a witness, I will treat you equally and with respect. And I understand that when you come to court, it can be a very stressful situation. Sometimes it may be someone's first interaction with government, a traffic ticket, a speeding ticket, or maybe a criminal case, or it could be an eviction. And so I think it's my job and the magistrate's job to demonstrate that government, especially at the local level, is here to work for you. So we will try to find a solution that's unique to everyone, that respects your time, that respects the lawyer's time, and it's just honest and transparent and friendly and cooperative. I'm not going to be the type of judge who says this is my court and it's my way or the highway. I truly believe that this is the people's court, and that I am just here to call balls and strikes, and I'll listen to the facts, I'll listen to the arguments, and I will use the law to the letter of the law, but I'll do so with kindness and compassion and patience, so that even if I have to rule against someone and I punish them on a traffic ticket, I still want them to say government worked the way it should have. And even though I didn't like that speeding ticket, the judge was respectful and he followed the law and treated me fairly, just like anyone else. That I want that to be the impression that people have in this court. And I hope to win the full 6 years, but I'll get a head start on the other candidates the next 6 months.
That's true. Okay, I have one question. I mean, I'm sure, I don't know whether you heard of this judge in Pennsylvania, Painesville, Pennsylvania. Have you heard of him? I forgot his name. I mean, he has been, giving the sentences like, for a simple things like walking 30 miles. I mean, a lady evaded paying the fees to the taxi driver. So he gave an option of either walking down 30 miles or jail or 3 months jail, something like those kind of. He gave an option of that kind. So what do you think of those kind of options to the convict? Or the people who are offenders? I would say the right word would be the offenders. Yes.
As a current judge, I don't want to question the orders of another judge. I'll respect that judge. But just my general idea is the court should not be in the news for anything that's shocking or disrespectful. So my court should not be an outlier in its punishment and its issuing of bonds or probation or sentencing. They should follow the law. And so the legislature usually gives the judge some discretion on high and the low points of sentencing. And so I'm going to follow what the legislature has done. And that discretion will demonstrate the uniqueness of everyone that comes to court. So, not everyone needs the same punishment. People come to the court, and sometimes they need help in other ways. Maybe it's counseling, maybe it's therapy, drug testing, and so every person that comes to the court will be analyzed for their unique needs. So if there is discretion in the law, I will use that discretion. But lawyers and people that come before the court should know that we're sticking to the law, and so that they should have confidence that there's not going to be a wild, unlawful sentence. There is predictability. There's predictability in my rulings, and that's how it should be. Stability, predictability. But then when there is discretion, that should reflect the uniqueness of the individuals that come before my court.
Very nice. So do you have any message to the audience right now? I mean, about your new job or your elections, or as a mayor of Madison Heights?
I just want to, well, first of all, thank you for this interview. I really appreciated our conversation. You have a great program, and your audience is so informed and curious about issues. What I've learned in local office is your city, your township government has the most direct impact on our lives, right? If you're in danger, you call 911 and your city will send a police officer to save you. If your house is on fire or you have a heart attack, it's the city that sends a fire truck and an ambulance. Also another local government, the school. The school educates your children. The courthouse, we help you navigate some of the low points of your life, right? If you're caught drunk driving, there's probably some underlying issue in your life. And we have the ability to intervene and to help you. And so as people are going to vote this year, they'll vote for a new president, or maybe replace or return the current president. They'll get to vote for their state legislators and county offices. They'll also get to vote for judges. And so voters should not just go to make the selection for president. They should also educate themselves on the people running for local office, because those men and women like myself, we're nonpartisan. I'm not a Democrat or Republican. I am a nonpartisan. I'm just here to help. And you know what? The judge could live in your neighborhood. The mayor may live in your neighborhood. You may know where he or she lives. It's the most direct, sincere form of government that's accountable, the most accountable. And so voters should really get to know the people in their city hall, their courthouse, and their school board. And that's just my advice to anyone. And that's what I would want to leave this interview on.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for your time, and we wish you all the best on your new role and also the coming elections. And have a nice rest of the evening.
Very good. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Nice day. Good night.